Hey there, I'm Neil. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the host of my new podcast, Pause and Rewind. I'll be chatting to changemakers, thought leaders, and role models who all share a common goal. They're striving to make the world a more inclusive place. And let's face it, we need it. Each guest has a unique story when it comes to doing their thing, and we often know who people are in the now. But how much do we really know about them? Pause and Rewind takes a moment to explore the experiences in my guest's life that led them to where and who they are now. Because everyone loves an origin story. We'll dive into tales, anecdotes, and what makes our guests tick. So, are you ready to pause and rewind? Hey there, and welcome to this episode of Pause and Rewind. I hope that you are enjoying the episodes so far this year. They have been absolutely fantastic with so many great conversations with the guests. Today is no different. I am chatting to Dr. Arun Verma. Arun is the head of equality and inclusion at the University of London and fellow of the RSA. He's also the leading figure in integrating intersectionality, inclusion, and equity in higher education systems, policy, and programs, both nationally and internationally. That is how I met Aaron. I met him back in 2022 when he was launching his book, Anti-Racism in Higher Education, an Action Guide for Change. And that was great meeting Aaron, and we've kept in touch since. And it's always wonderful to see him out and about at various events. From Mighty Hoopla to UK Black Pride. And he's just a lovely, lovely person to be around. And like everyone, I know who Aaron is here and now, but was really excited to dive into his origin story. And I found so much about his education journey, but also him growing up, and how the moments and the relationships and the realizations in his life led to the work he is doing now, specifically around intersectionality and his journey with that, and how that helped him understand his own identity and lived experience. So, really excited for this conversation. As always, please do take care of yourself whilst listening. Take a break if you need to. Come back to it another time. But I think you're going to really enjoy it. So, here it is. Cheers. Hey there, Aaron. It's so good to see you. Welcome to Pause and Rewind.
Thanks for having me, Neil. It's good to be here.
Well, love that you're here. And I want to start with a big question that I ask every guest. What does the world look like for Dr. Arun Verma right now?
Neil, the world is madness right now. I think one of the things from my perspective right now is thinking about how the work of equality and inclusion and diversity is meant to achieve such social good that has become so politically stigmatized. And for me, that's one of the biggest things in the world. And it just strikes me as really odd that that's the rhetoric and narrative. However, I will say another part of that narrative and another part of that world is in this realm of equality and inclusion and diversity and social justice. I've met just the most awesome, coolest people. I'm so privileged to hang out with people that inspire me, including yourself and various others. So I know the world is not great, but I do get to hang out with some of the coolest people, I think, in the country, probably in the world. So yeah.
I absolutely echo that. Firstly, like it was a real privilege meeting you. It was, I think we just said before we jumped on, it was around over 2.5 years ago now when you first launched the book Anti-Racism in Higher Education, an Action Guide for Change. And I loved working with you, putting that event together with colleagues at London South Bank University when I was there. And you're so right. We do get to work with truly inspirational people, with my role at We Create Space and just being out there in this sector. I am constantly inspired by those around me.
Yeah. And I think it's quite funny because I don't think the world has changed significantly since the launch of that book. I think we're still having the same issues, the same challenges, but maybe in a more amplified space, a more magnified space at this point. So, but again, like I have to say, the people that keep fighting, that keep doing the work, that keep powering through, is incredible. And I think that's sometimes we forget to celebrate that joyful resistance. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yes, and whether that is whether that is catching up at UK Black Pride or Mighty Hoopla, as we mentioned as well before we jumped on, those moments to come together and knowing that work is also there, but tapping into joy is really important. You've been in this for a long time, right? You are the leading figure when it comes to intersectionality, inclusion, particularly in higher education. Right now, it does feel like there's a relentless attack against, kind of like wokeness and the left and stuff. You said it just feels more amplified. Does it feel a lot different from when you first started this kind of work?
I I don't think it's really changed. I think these kinds of different kinds of resistance or counter arguments to equality have always been around since the dawn of time. I
Hmm.
mean, if we look back over hundreds of years, whenever there's been a movement to empower people or communities that have been marginalized or displaced or disempowered, as soon as those groups start to get rights, another counter group forms to repeal those. We saw it in the 50s, 60s, and 70s when certain race relations work was happening, and then the National Front formed. All of the time, there's been this to and fro in some ways. So every time a minoritized group gets something, it's so fragile to be held on to. And we're seeing this in slightly we're seeing this similar sort of conversation repeat itself in slightly more nuanced ways. So I don't think it's a new thing. Um, I think I think there's a way in which though we do social justice work that needs to be continuously be more smart, more strategically ahead of things, and also just be prepared for the constant backlash that you get with it. And it's the crude reality of it, I think, in some ways. But yeah, so that's kind of where I think I do think there's some complacency though with this. I think some of the commitments that have been made that we saw 5 years ago have started to reel themselves back in different ways. I'm seeing certain leadership posts for equality and inclusion not really appearing after the post holder has left in some organizations. And that just begs the question of what were the organizations thinking in the first place? What did they actually expect? And did they actually help those people to be successful? Did they actually help the agenda to be successful? So I think there's more critical questions to really kind of think about and hold them to account in some ways. But yeah, I don't think the issues have changed too much. But yeah,
Yeah, I think you're right. It definitely needs to be dealt with a smarter, more innovative head, and we're seeing lots of talk around innovation when it comes to DEI and advancing it. But also, you're so right. The sustainability and the long-lasting impact. Some initiatives they really lack that.
yeah, yeah, and I think some of it's to do with funding. There's a funding issue in terms of things are piloted for a short amount of time, and then the activities and interventions don't really live beyond that in some ways. And the other part is actually measuring the impact of these things as well. And I've been in various meetings recently over the last few months trying to encourage people to start evaluating what they're doing so that we can start contributing and take control of the narrative of impact that's
Yeah.
needed. Because
Yes.
I think the case was there 5 years ago and many times before that as well. But now we've got an opportunity to kind of go, this is the change that's happened because of all of this work. And if we didn't have these people doing this work, we would never have been able to achieve what we wanted to achieve. So I know that's only one part of it, and there's a lot more influencing to do, but that's something where I've kind of been in my world trying to kind of influence change and bring that level of thinking on as well.
Absolutely. When there's metrics and there's proof, it's really hard to argue with.
Yeah, absolutely.
You'd mentioned about it does feel like there's constant pushback, and then so I'd like to ask you a question that you might not have an answer for, but it taps into what does the world look like for you right now, personally, I guess, and it's how do you look after yourself against all of this backlash and the political climate we're facing?
I think one of the things being in the UK at this point of time, and I was saying that before we joined as well, actually, is being privileged enough to actually turn off, and I mean turn devices off or to turn off notifications or whatever it is, and to take some time just to enjoy being at home with family and loved ones. And I think that's one thing that's been really, really powerful, and that's something I've been being much more conscious and intentional about. Um, I think the other part as well is actually connecting with community more, and being around people that share the frustrations, so you don't feel like you're completely isolated, and convening those spaces. I think for me personally, I've been on a therapeutic journey, particularly over the last 6 months. I started engaging in counseling. That has been hugely transformational for me because I feel like I'm in a different stage of my life, personally and professionally, where I need to start thinking about my new relationship with my emotions and my identity and who I am now. And having the privilege to actually invest in counseling has been a huge benefit to me as well. And that's something that I've been really, really grateful for to help me navigate these kind of wider anxieties and local anxieties and stresses and stuff. So those are some of the ways in which I've been kind of engaging with self-care and well-being, particularly amongst all this craziness. So yeah.
Yeah. And with that switching off, do you find that those things that you've kind of explored, do they help you to not just switch off your devices, but also switch off mentally?
Oh, for sure. So I now have timers on my app. So I have a daily limit of how much I can look at certain apps and news and things like that. So I give myself between, I think, 15 to 30 minutes a day to look at these things, read news articles, read what's going on, and then I don't have access to those things after that 30 minutes. And in I've been doing that for a few weeks now, and that has actually been hugely helpful for me in terms of helping my attention and also just kind of being a little bit more focused and less anxious about catastrophizing the world right now. So app timer limits has been an absolute send an inspiration for me.
That sounds amazing because it's really hard to break those habits, right?
Yeah.
But actually, when you break them, you do see the benefits fairly quickly if you can stick to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been 3 weeks, but I'm hoping to
That's
stick with
amazing.
it. So yeah.
Okay, I've never gone down the route of timers, and I think because often when you're working in this field or you rely on a public profile on social media platforms like you do on LinkedIn,
Mm.
I imagine for a lot of
Yeah.
your work, myself, it's definitely on Instagram for promoting
Yeah.
the podcast and the House of Happiness. I rely on it so much, and even the thought of making that shift is like, but how would I get everything done if there was a timer on it? So maybe I just need to do it.
Well, I have to say though, with something like LinkedIn it's a little bit easy because you can do it via the computer.
Mm,
Whereas I don't know with Instagram if you can do the same things as
no,
you
you
would on a
can't.
desktop. So it's with LinkedIn, it's a bit of a get out. It's a bit of a cheeky one because I do log on and I'll write my articles and things that I need to do on there as well. But it does, I mean, removing one device or my phone just away from my hand has been quite empowering in itself.
Yeah. Okay. Right. You've inspired me as always, to make a bit of a shift. Um, I know lots about you now, as do so many people, but I'm really excited to dive into your origin story. So for now, are you ready to pause and rewind?
Definitely, Neil. Thank you.
Here we go. Take me back. Tell me all about little Aaron.
So, I guess in terms of where I grew up, and I grew up in Southwest London in a Indian family. So my parents immigrated. My dad immigrated from India. My mum immigrated from Tanzania. I think in the 60s, I believe, roughly. And we grew up in a beautiful house in Southwest London, which was great. My parents worked 6 to 7 days a week, and it's quite interesting because I grew up in an environment where my parents were definitely in the working class sort of category. And then through, making strategic investments and building up their work, they kind of came out of that category and moved up to another class, wherever that's called. Um, but growing up for me was nice. I mean, I was kind of growing up in two different cultures at the same time. We were the only Indian family in the street at the time in the area, and part of it was at home, so learning about Hinduism and celebrating all the Hindu festivals and being around loads of family and inviting neighbors to events to be part of, be part of the culture, and during celebrations. And then on the flip side, I went to a Church of England school, between 8 and 3, and that was also really interesting. Growing up in almost two different worlds that didn't necessarily fit together, but it was quite exciting growing up. Um, and I grew up in a big family. I have four other siblings. Everyone's super strong personality wise, and I was the quietest one in the family. I'm the youngest, and I was always known for being the quietest one in the family. Naturally quite observant, naturally quite reserved. I think being around quite fierce characters, and very strong women as well. So yeah, so that's kind of like my early years. That's how I grew up. That's how I remember family dinners and being at different events and celebrations and stuff like that, and being caught in two cultures at the same time.
It sounds like quite a joyful experience, but perhaps one that we were very kind of like sitting back and watching what was going on all
Mm.
around you.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to get a word in edgeways with my family,
Is
and
it
I mean
still
that in
like
the
that
best.
now?
Yeah, yeah, my family now. So like, it's and I mean that in the best way possible. Like it's always such a laugh, and it's such a highly engaged and interactive environment. Um, on the flip side of that, whilst I was growing up with all these celebrations and being a part of these two cultures, I also recognized quite early on that I was gay and gay, and that didn't fit in any of those worlds.
Mhm.
Both worlds hugely heteronormative, particularly like growing up in the South Asian culture, weddings, everything is focused around man and woman, bride and groom. Like that was the center of everything. So that for me, whilst I was enjoying and being a part of these two different worlds, I was also kind of navigating this identity of queerness, this being gay, and not really knowing where that fit. So that changed. It's only when I grew up I started to realize how that affected me, and that was how it changed how I looked at the world as well. Then,
Yeah. Did you so you recognized that at quite a young age in terms of queerness. Did you still feel a sense of belonging in yourself, within your place in your family? Was there a bit of kind of like conflict in those two things?
yeah, I think it's kind of like a strange situation in some ways
Mm.
because I felt placed and displaced at the same time,
Yeah.
belonged and unbelonged at the same time. It's kind of this weird thing because part of me we were so close as a family unit, and we went to all these events and celebrations together as a family. You still feel this sense of I am part of the family, but then actually, where do I fit in if I'm gay?
Yeah.
That's also quite a strange thing. And there was no place for that to exist. There's no conversation to be had either. So it's very much in the closet, metaphorically speaking, obviously, and really kind of hidden away in that space, trying to work out what is safe to do and what isn't.
Yeah.
So I think most of the time I did feel that sense of belonging, but I still felt quite hidden. And that was mostly because I didn't really understand what was going on with me as well.
Yeah.
And there was no language or discourse or conversation about it. When I think about it, my parents grew up in a generation where being gay was centered around like the gay plague of the AIDS
Mm.
crisis and the HIV pandemic and so on, all of these kind of horrible negative stereotypes of what queerness meant. So that was never ever going to come up as a conversation or something with them as well because that was not part of their world. So it's
Yeah.
quite interesting being in that space.
It I mean, a similar themes come up on the podcast all the time around, lack of language
Yeah.
terminology, representation and what was out there at the time, and then just not having the awareness and the understanding. I want to come back to that. I'd love to know what's perhaps your favorite anecdote that you've been told about yourself growing up?
So it's, I guess one of my favorite ones, which my sister reminded me of at my wedding, I think it was, or just before I was getting married. Um, because I was so quiet and I wasn't necessarily ambitious about anything in my teen years. Um, there was sort of this running teasing. My family's full of like teasing kind of humor and jokes and stuff. There's this sort of joke that I wouldn't really go on to do anything um, great or successful in life, that I would just kind of be on this sort of like maybe keep quiet, just kind of work for my dad, and that'll be the rest of my life kind of thing, which is nothing wrong with that at all. Um, but I remember my sister saying that to me, and then all of a sudden ended up with kind of 3 degrees, a book, and an honorary doctorate, and all this other kind of stuff. And she was like, "Where on earth did that come from? And why wasn't that there when you were in your teenage years?" And so we laugh about it now, and it's for this funny thing, which is like, where was that ambition in your teenage years, and how is that? How have you gone from being the quiet, reserved, unambitious teenager to this now quite successful, well-regarded leader in equality and inclusion and social justice? So it was quite one of those funny things that turned around over time. But I just remember her telling me that how she used to was worried about me at that age, thinking, "Oh God, what's he going to do with his life?" So yeah,
And those are quite, being queer in a very heteronormative space, and then kind of I imagine coming out in later,
yeah,
a bit later, and having those conversations, and then completely surprising your family on a kind of like professional and achievement level as well.
yeah.
How has their views of you and and your place in the family changed over the years with all of that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One of the things that has really kind of come about is they really respect the work that I do, and they've told me that as well. And I think they were always going to be proud of me, whatever I did, because there's the unconditional love there. But they've always expressed like how proud they are of me, and that's something that didn't really happen early on, particularly in my teenage years, because I was so confused. You have no idea what you want to do with your life when you're 15. Well, I didn't anyway. And
Okay, still don't.
but then kind of ending up in something that you think you're quite good at, and then getting rewarded for it. Um, I think they kind of there's a different kind of conversation and respect, which has been really really nice to have that. I think that did change though when I did come out in my early 20s. My whole relationship with my family changed significantly after that as well. In different ways. My parents, we didn't speak for a while, but now we're really close, and my siblings were always really supportive. But I think that changed our conversation. It deepened our relationship in some ways.
Hmm.
And I think because I was able to be more authentically me with them.
Yeah.
I wasn't hiding them anymore because I found I was okay to be Indian, gay, and part of an English culture all at the same time, and that was fine. So yeah,
Uh, and I imagine now your conversation, those conversations being deep, I imagine that having gone through all of those various life shifts and being able, have you found a way that you learn to communicate things so that it is a lot more open and stuff now?
yeah, definitely. I think particularly in the last few years, like with my husband and being married, like doing something so public in that sense, and doing something that invites friends and family to that celebration and ceremony, I've really not hidden any parts of my queerness with my family anymore. Um, and I think that's been hugely transformative because my partner is a part of my wider family, and that wasn't necessarily the case in previous relationships or um yeah, like in previous years as well, of course. So yeah, I think that in itself has been we're in a different space altogether, which
Yeah.
is and it's really exciting. It's nice to be there.
And beautiful, transformative for all of you,
Yeah,
for all
yeah,
of your
for sure.
journeys of awareness, and actually probably it all probably fits beautifully into the work you do and the way you live authentically and how you show up in the world.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think it's I remember even like one of the I was at Norwich Pride maybe a few years back during a panel conversation, and it was one of the few times where I was able to talk about both my multitude of identities, the different cultures I kind of navigate and move between, and just sharing my story and sharing my experiences to the point where I remember one person came up to me and said that she was described herself as a South Asian lesbian woman, and she didn't have any representation in that city until she saw me on the panel, and she felt that there was more of a connection because I also shared some of those identities, and being able to authentically express my story in a way that connects with someone else and just made them feel a little bit more seen. That was like hugely, that made me realize that actually sharing some of that and being my authentic self in those particular environments has been really super powerful, as it has been with my family. So yeah.
Oh, wonderful. And I we have this in common as well. I was very quiet and didn't find my voice until kind of like later.
Yeah.
Very scared of public speaking and just wasn't really out there. And now I have. You
Yeah.
can't shut me up. Probably so I think we share that in common. I would love to know, let's dive back a little bit. What were you like at school?
I loved and hated school. I love learning, but I hated being told what to do, and I hated being told what to learn. So secondary school was a real struggle for me. I didn't really have a great time in secondary school, to be honest. I was met with sort of various kinds of bullying and didn't. I had some friends, but it was quite a small group. I was really not confident in my skin. I was more overweight than others and just lacked self-esteem and self-confidence in every way, shape, or form. Um, and so secondary school in particular was quite a strange place for me. Um, and I think I was still trying to come to terms with being gay, and that was really, really confusing when everyone was talking about like kissing girls or kissing boys and stuff like that. It's just a really odd experience. So it was quite strange. Think about school now, and I don't necessarily think I had the the greatest time in contrast to some of my peers. But I had a small group of friends who kind of helped me get through. When I actually did the learning or the studying that I wanted to do, I absolutely loved it. And that took me away into another world. And I spent most of my time in the library. I used to be hidden in between at the back, usually in between like the fantasy section of the library as it was then at school during breaks, and that would be my absolute safest place. Where I just lost myself in fantasy worlds there. So it's quite a mixed bag for me at school. But there was different places where I could go and seek and to live my own dreams and live my own fantasies out in my own head, which was quite exciting. But I wouldn't go back. That was the
No,
case.
I mean, hell no. And again, it just, it's such a common thing, isn't it? That it can be, yeah, it can be such a miserable time for so many
Yeah.
queer people.
Yeah, I remember there was it's so interesting. When they were doing like relationship education, when we got to like year 10 or 11 or something, and they showed this video which was like the A to Z of relationships, and it got to G and it was gay, and it was this really arbitrary like 15-second introduction to gay people. And I remember a few of the school kids at the time looked at me and said, "Oh, you would know all about that." And then I was like, "Wait, what? I don't understand. I don't even know who I am. Never mind. Like, how does everyone else know?" It was a really odd thing, but there was never any support. I don't even think the teachers at the time had the literacy to navigate those conversations. I remember though when I did start to explore those identities because I was experiencing bullying at the time. I went to an LGBT charity in the local area, and that's when I got my first stint of counselling and started to understand what I was feeling. And that was one of my saving graces at school because I had, well, towards leaving school anyway. That was one of my safe places as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that I was quite fortunate in some ways. There was a couple of spaces where I could go to on my own. I'm not really sure how I ended up finding them. I can't remember that far back. It's been a while. So yeah.
Same. We definitely growing up in deepest darkest Essex didn't have access to
Yeah.
that. But I know that when I went to sixth form college, I definitely found those spaces and those people where I
Yeah.
felt much safer than I did in secondary school.
Yeah.
What did you think? What was the plan? Obviously, kind of working in intersectionality and EDI was not around
Yeah.
at the time we were growing up. So what was the plan in your mind that you wanted to do when you grew up?
I wanted to be a musician.
Okay.
I loved jazz music, absolutely loved jazz music and playing in the band and choir to the point when I was in college from 16 to 18. I performed in the jazz band, the orchestra, the wind band, and the choir, and was doing all those things. I was playing in a jazz band, doing gigs around London. It was just the coolest, most fun thing ever. And I really loved it. And I nearly got into music school. That was going to be my degree. That was going to be the thing that I did next. And that was what was going to be my career. When I got to the audition, I didn't think I had the tenacity as some of the other musicians did to pursue that career. And I ended up taking a year out anyway. But no, initially I wanted to be in jazz. I wanted to be a jazz musician. That was the thing that I thought I wanted to do and to have a career in music. I was even learning to play the sitar when I was a bit younger as well. Like, because I absolutely loved it, and I still love music, but maybe more an appreciative way
I
rather
was
than
gonna
doing it.
say, do you harbor any regrets or even ambitions to pick it back up again at some point?
Yeah, I mean, I still have my clarinet and my sitar as well, so I probably could pick it up and start back. I think it's more of a joy,
Mm,
which I wouldn't want to become a career, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, yeah.
Or
No,
pursue as a
absolutely,
career.
absolutely
Um,
makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, so I think
What
it's
did you play in? Was that your main thing, playing instruments?
yeah. So the clarinet was my main instrument, and
Right.
that's what I was going to do my degree in at the time. That's what I applied to do initially, and then I got nervous and cancelled everything and took a year off. So yeah, and worked in a call center for a year instead. So that was much quite a dive into reality in some ways. But yeah,
And then what happens next?
so I did go to a university for about half a term, and I dropped out because it wasn't for me. Was staying at home. I needed some time to think about what I actually wanted to do. I remember looking at psychology because that was one of my A levels at the time. It's actually the A level I did the worst in, but I just really enjoyed it. So I thought maybe that's the course. So I applied. I already had my grade, so I applied to a university and got in unconditionally and was ready to go. But I still had like six or 7 months left before starting. And I knew I wanted to do something on my year out to try and mark the occasion at least. And I also wanted to get away from home because I was struggling a bit with the decisions I was making and not really understanding what I wanted to do with my life and everything. So I went to the States for about 3 months on my own. And I went on these crazy adventures in hostels, met random people, met some friends, and I just had the best time, so liberated. But I really found out who I was and what I was able to do in that time as well, which was really powerful. Yeah, it's good. That's what I did. I just worked and then I finished working and I went and just did something completely wild for me anyway, and then went to university shortly after that trip. So yeah, it was good. It was a good year. I think I have so many good memories of traveling around the States. I mean, I got to spend a month in New York City, just felt like I lived there for a few weeks. It was really nice. So yeah.
You came back. went to university. What university did you go to?
So I did my first degree at University of Portsmouth, which was great because it's by the sea. And after lectures, you could go to the beach. And I met some really cool people there as well. So I had a lot of fun. It's also the place where I first joined the LGBT, well, it was then called the LGBT Society. There was no plus QIA bit at that point. And that's when I started to really meet gay people, queer community. And yeah, I started to explore that and have fun as well, which was quite good. So I started to come into my own at university as well and really kind of go, I'm not afraid of hanging out with the gay community anymore. So I threw myself into that and started connecting with people in different ways and exploring and having little adventures as well. So yeah.
So that was degree number one.
Yeah.
That was degree number one. What happens after that? Did you go straight into another degree, or was there a bit of early career going on?
So I graduated, I worked in sales for a little while, just to pay the bills. And I was doing that for maybe 1 or 2 years, about 2 years, I think. So yes, I was in insurance sales. I was cold calling. It was, and I ended up also after that shortly in a marketing role for a maritime magazine, doing advertisements there. But to be honest, I didn't enjoy those roles. I was doing it to pay to get money, and it definitely wasn't my calling. It definitely wasn't something I wanted to do. I really wanted to go back into education. I knew I hadn't finished what I'd started. When I left my degree in Portsmouth, I put so much into that degree. I was at 19 when I received my first research grant at that university. I worked with my supervisor every summer. My supervisor told me at the time, he said, if you have to go and do a PhD. And I just, working for a couple of years after graduating, I just knew I had to go and try and pursue that. So after working, I went to do my master's. So I had a bit of a stint. Getting paid and partying is probably the safe way to put it. Um, and then I went back to do my master's in clinical and counseling applications of psychology, where I thought I wanted to be a counseling clinical psychologist. But quickly on the course, started to realize working with patients and clients was not my calling. So research was definitely my thing. So yeah.
And how much of the skills from those two areas, so sales and then that one, do you bring into what you do now?
The sales and marketing work has been hugely helpful in helping me understand how to read the room when I'm pitching ideas or thinking about what I'm communicating with groups or people.
Mm,
Um, I mean, in those environments, it's much harsher. There's much more kind of like relationship building as
yeah,
well. But there's some definitely transferable things that from that which have hugely helped the way in which I engage with people now.
yeah.
And also, like, I'm looking actively to try and bid for funding for certain projects and initiatives. These are skills which I developed in a different environment, but still help me with those things now. So that, whilst I didn't like it as a
Yeah.
job, they have like hugely helped me. The masters in counselling, the skills I developed around counselling and pastoral care and skills in that space are absolutely intrinsic to everything I do and bring. Very much about being people and well-being first. That is so, so important to me, especially in equality, inclusion, social justice
Mm,
work. Um, it's so important for me to kind of make sure I'm not a counseling practitioner in any way, shape, or form, but I know what it means to create a safer space or a more inclusive space and one that promotes spaces for people to heal and connect and share with each other. So it's really, really important that that's one of the first things that I tried to really home in on as well. So that's a result from that education as well.
yeah, you can definitely see all of those skills coming together, the sales and marketing, the way you influence people and bring them along on the journey,
Yeah,
and to buy into what you're saying, and then that creating spaces and absolutely for heal connection and for people to thrive. And I know that's something that's really important in your work as well
yeah,
when you look at when you look at the way you talk about staff retention and student success in higher education.
Yeah, it's the one thing that I think is really important. We can't just hinge people to numbers and metrics. It's important, of course, but people are people,
Yeah.
and you know, inequality and oppression impacts people's health and well-being. It's something that I learned quite quickly that, the nation of oppression and social injustice and inequality and racism, for example, has a physical impact on people's in terms of chronic inflammation, for example. These are like actual health outcomes. So we can't just kind of say it's just about people getting promoted or getting to that top job. It's actually kind of going, if we don't solve this, we're not protecting or safeguarding our staff, our students from health issues or issues that could affect them in the long term. And that's why I'm always thinking about the human or the person first and the well-being, because I always think, we are in a capitalist structure, we are in hierarchical structures. The further you move up the ladder anywhere, the further you are away from people's humanity. And I think that's always being reminded and connecting with that, I think is really, really important. As well as kind of getting people in through the door and all those other
Yeah.
wonderful things as well.
Yeah, let's get you there, but let's also get you there in one piece.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Um, I feel like that takes us really neatly onto your PhD. What was that experience like for you?
That was probably one of the most transformational experiences I'd had in my education. When I was coming out of my master's, I was looking to do a PhD on the basis that I I just couldn't stop. I had to keep going with my essentially my idea was that if I want to become one of the best researchers, you have to have a PhD. And I can't become a good researcher or a good inquirer or someone with professional curiosity without it. So that was my main goal, kind of as I was coming towards the end of my masters. So I applied and I applied. I think I applied for over 20 PhD studentships and applications. I got rejected from all of them except for one, which was at the University of Dundee. And I went for this long interview. It was so long. I had to travel and train the night before. I was there from like 9 till 2 in the afternoon being interviewed for this PhD studentship. And I think it was somewhere around £50,000 of funding. So there's quite a lot of money to cover everything for 3 years. Um, and it was a grueling interview process. It was a presentation to the academic center. It was an informal conversation with postdocs and PhD researchers already there, an exam, and then a panel interview with 4 to 5 people. One person I think was on the phone at the time. And I had to travel back that day as well. So I was absolutely exhausted.
I bet.
And so from that moment, I knew that PhD experience was going to be, if I got that placement, that was going to be the thing that's going to change my life. And I got the offer within a week to do that and to get that studentship. And I threw myself into it completely. It's hard. It was tough work. I had 4 supervisors by the end of it, all with very different styles. The work was full time, and it was full time and then some for about 3 to 4 years in total. But I learned so much, and that was where I learned about intersectionality. That was the place where I personally discovered it for myself and started to understand what it was that what this theory was, what this metaphor was, as Kimberly Crenshaw mentioned it in relation to the Black woman's experience in the States. But then I also started to understand that I was also what I'd experienced throughout my life, what we talked about being navigating different cultures and worlds, that I could be all these things and it's okay because that's my experience of the world. And so I get to decide that those things fit together, not the world, right? And I started to have this quite personal, professional, academic realization through the PhD that intersectionality became sort of my healing metaphor for myself. And it became a central part of my my academic work. That's where it was really transformational because I started to connect the two together. It became quite a personal journey as well. And then obviously like getting a doctorate and going through that process and the Viva and everything was hugely he requires a lot of willpower, requires a lot of perseverance, maybe more perseverance than intelligence in the final year, but it was totally worth it. And that has been a huge springboard for everything I've done since. It has really been a foundation, a bedrock for a lot of things I've done.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly your voice in inclusion, and then to be recognized that quite recently by Dundee with the honorary doctorate.
Yeah, that was incredible. It was I found out about it, I think early last year in 2024, that I'd been nominated and approved by the Senate, I think, and the principal to be conferred an honorary doctorate. I was in absolute disbelief. I remember I was in the office and my colleague and I got the email on my phone. I was like, this isn't real, this is spam. And then I was like, no, it's an actual letter, it's signed. And my colleague said, that's amazing. Go for a walk. And I went for a walk just to like digest the news. And in this work, I don't do this work to be thanked or to be acknowledged in some ways. Like that's not the goal, but being acknowledged and being almost like validated in that way just really kind of
Yeah.
reassures you on the right track in some ways and that you're having some real world impact as well. So that was, yeah, such an honor.
I've got goosebumps thinking about that moment that you received that. And what was the ceremony like? Was it you said
Oh,
disbelief?
Neil, it was so cool. It was like a dream. Yeah, so the graduation is kind of done over a couple of days. So it's a real kind of celebration of like graduates. And the night before was a black tie dinner at the Verdant Works in Dundee, which was the old Jutes factory. And the principal was there and they did like this amazing celebration, this amazing dinner with everyone and some key figures from the university and the local community to celebrate the honorary doctoral nominations. I think there were six of us in total, so it was quite nice to kind of meet the others and connect in that space. But the actual graduation day was really incredible. It was dressed in a full kind of academic robe or this special kind of graduate robe and photo shoots and interviews. I don't remember fully much of it, but I do remember being part of the academic procession with bagpipes and drums going through the city into the Caird Hall. And then I got to had the privilege of giving an acceptance speech for the honorary doctorate, which was quite nerve wracking because I was speaking to students, new generations, and their families, and I was blown away by the standing ovation and the response from that. Where I spoke about my experiences with my own life, queerness, mental health, my work around intersectionality and inclusion, and taking a rights-based approach. And I think in some way it just seemed to really connect with them. And getting a standing ovation, a long standing ovation was hugely yeah, even thinking about it now makes me kind of gives me kind of a warm feeling. So yeah.
And hugely deserved. I
Thanks.
mean, your work speaks for itself.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I'd love to ask, and I guess that brings us up to, the career that we see now. I'd love to ask, who has a lesson that you've learned along the way, followed by someone who shaped you the most along the way?
There's been so many people that have been influential in my journey. One of the things that comes to mind when I think about one particular lesson I learned quite quickly is during my master's, I remember I got a not so good grade on one of my assignments. And I went to the professor at the time and kind of said, what more can I do to get a higher grade on this? And she said to me, it was a good piece of work, but you also don't need to chase the highest grade to have the biggest impact. And it didn't dawn on me that, okay, yes, it's great to do really, really well and get the highest award. But it just gave me a different perspective that actually sometimes creating impact isn't necessarily getting the A's and the A pluses or the firsts. It's actually translating in that into something else, something more meaningful. And that's something that really stuck with me because I got really down about grades and success in that way. And I know it's important, it is really, really important. But for me in that moment, it just kind of made me let go of that pressure and do the things that I really enjoyed. And when I was doing the things that I enjoyed, I ended up getting the better grades because I was just putting more love into it. And that was a really positive, pivotal moment. That's something that stuck with me ever since, in the sense of I work in systems which are not always that forgiving for marginalized groups, but knowing I can bring the joy in spaces and a sphere of control that I do have, and knowing I can create impact without getting the highest grade is where I try to focus my efforts in that space. I think there's been a number of other people. I mean, like my principal supervisor of my PhD, who I'm still really, really good friends with. She didn't really have specific kind of like words or quotes that I can recall, but she was always just such a big presence and a steady rock when things just felt like they were crumbling in that final year of my PhD. And seeing someone lead with compassion and care and showing me grace was just something that I always wanted to try and bring to everything that I do, because when you receive it, then it feels like you want to be able to give that to everyone else as well. And I think those are the kinds of behaviors and values that have been really key to me. There's many other people that have been hugely influential, but those are probably two that come to mind.
Yeah, yeah. And those values really shine through in what you
Mm,
do as well, particularly
thanks.
around the way you educate people.
Mm,
Particularly that grace part is so important,
yeah.
right? It's so important. Does happiness and success look and feel how you thought it would?
I definitely didn't think I'd be doing this when I was 5 years old. So I guess it's quite difficult, isn't it? I don't think I knew what happiness and success were from a young age. I don't think I knew what it meant to be happy when I was much younger because I felt so displaced and so unsure of myself when I was, my younger years. But I have to say that I didn't expect to have achieved what I've achieved and feel the love from all of it in the way that I thought I would. Feel like I've broken barriers with the things that I've done. I don't think I ever really got time to appreciate that until maybe in the last couple of years. But I'm happy in the sense that I have a really strong support base with my family and friends. I have a job that I am really passionate about, and I get to engage with some of the coolest people in the world, which wouldn't happen in other roles. I firmly believe that. And the success is really just a byproduct of the happiness. I focus on what makes me happy. I focus on the things that bring me joy. I fight for the rights which I think need to be fought for where I can make change. And the success comes as a byproduct to that as well. Like things like the honorary doctorate, for example, it was not something I was ever working towards. It happened because I was doing something I just really, really love doing. So I guess that's kind of, I don't know if I answered that question. I might have dodged it a bit, but yes.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's a hard one. Loads of
Yeah.
people say it's a hard question because what is success? And
Yeah.
it's so hard to gauge. But no, you answered it. You answered it perfectly. And I think what comes through is just that you love doing what you do, and I really love that success being a byproduct of your happiness that's spurred by your values and how you show up. My final question for this segment is, looking back to date, what are you most proud of so far?
I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that so far throughout my life and professional work is I've finished the things that I started. And what I mean by that is everything from throwing myself into the deep end of initiatives from when I was a teenager, being a peer mentor for children with special education needs at the age of like 14 and 15, through to doing that work and committing to it fully, through to publishing a book and not just saying I'm going to write a book, but actually doing it within and publishing it within 12 months, which is really difficult to do. Finishing my education, because that is also a difficult thing to do, just completing a course. That for me is the tenaciousness, and that's something I'm really, really proud of. I think with that as well is learning, is constantly learning and also being able to enjoy the things that I've been part of. A few years ago, I wasn't necessarily. I was just moving so fast and doing so many different things. I never actually stopped to think about: Am I really happy with what I'm doing, and am I recognizing and reflecting on the achievements I'm making? And I'm in a place now where I'm actually taking ownership of those things and actually enjoying being part of those things and being able to say that I'm actually proud of the things I've done. That's been a big, big difference. So actually just saying it has been quite nice, a nice kind of thing to be able to do. Um, I never thought I'd end up in this kind of role, mostly because these roles never existed in a job and career wise. But, as someone that is constructively disruptive in everything I do, I'm still pushing boundaries. This is not my only this is my my main job, of course, but I'm still doing my academic consultancy work in the night and the weekends because I just love doing it.
The House of Happiness is London's ultimate sober clubbing extravaganza. We're led and delivered but created for all, whether teetotal, sober curious, or just taking a booze snooze. We love a day raid, and on a Saturday afternoon you can expect banging house tunes, DJs on decks, dancers on podiums, and a fully stocked alcohol-free bar. Flamboyant, bold, with a glitter station to boot. We're all about safe, inclusive fun, and we even have a pre-meet so that you can make new sober buddies before you hit the dance floor. Grab your tickets from Instagram now at House of Happiness Official, and we'll see you on the dance floor. Are you ready for some quickfire questions?
Yeah, I'm ready.
What album, book, or movie, or all of them, have had a lasting impact on you?
It's funny that these are the most difficult questions, given some of the other
They are.
ones. um, I think okay, so I'm going to share two, if that's okay.
Of
So
course.
the first thing is an album, which is an album that my sister introduced me to. Is the first album that I really listened to, and it was by this amazing grunge band called the Pixies. And I absolutely fell in love with them. I've seen them several times since with my sister. And the album was is called Doolittle, and it was basically, it probably summarizes my teenage rebelliousness and the confusion that I had. And I still listen to it sometimes just to kind of transform myself back into that rebellious nature again in some ways. But it's that kind of grungy, anti-authoritarian, quiet music, which I just really, really loved. And that was one of the first albums I ever listened to, and it had such an impact. There is one film which is, I just thought it's just such a, it's not really a well-known film. It's this Whoopi Goldberg film from the 90s, called The Associate. And she plays this character in the finance and the Wall Street stock market, and she ends up quitting. And the only way she can get her consultancy up and running is if she pretends to be a white man. So she goes to a drag queen and gets put into this like white, older white male kind of get up, and she ends up taking over Wall Street in the guise. And it just, from even though it's from the 90s and it never really, I don't think it was that famous, it just resonated with me so much because one, it's hilarious, but two, but even the themes today are still kind of quite resonant. Even some familiar characters in certain powerful positions were in that film as well, but I will say no more unless you want to watch it. So yeah.
Check it out.
Yeah.
I love Whoopi.
Yeah.
I'm really hearing the rebellious side of you coming through, throughout this kind of like, didn't like being told what to do, didn't like being told what to learn. I see the disruptive nature of you in your work and how you've kind of taken on
Yeah.
these huge things. Um, did you feel rebellious growing up, and do you still feel rebellious now in the nature of what you do?
I think when I was much younger, I was disruptive and it was misguided.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really focused because, you're 14 years old with like 50,000 hormones and
Mm,
emotions. And the rebellion just comes out in different ways of like
yeah.
unfiltered anger for no reason whatsoever.
Mm,
But one of the things, the threads that I kind of caught on was there was something about questioning why I had to do certain things because someone told me to do it in a powerful position. And that's something that's always kind of stuck with me. What I've learned over time, and being in different industries and sectors and in different positions, because I wasn't always in this equality role, I was in a research
yeah.
position in various other places, was actually learning how to more strategically connect with people to make change happen. I learned the tools, I learned the skills about systems change, I learned what good evidence is, I learned what good strategy and policies are. I understood how to work with different people and stakeholders. All of those things started to give me the tools and equipment to really start to think about if I'm going to disrupt, I've now got the armor and the ways and the
Yeah.
techniques to actually do it in a way that's going to be sustainable. Whereas when I was 14, it was just kind of explode for no reason
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
there is always going to be that part, which is going to be questioning why do we have to do things that way?
Mm,
Why can't you just say yes to something, or why can't you just make this decision? Those are the kinds of things where I've tried to focus more
yeah.
constructive disruption. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I love how you've channeled it.
yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
tried to, yeah.
It's brilliant. What's a saying that you live by and one that you'd put in the bin?
There's two sayings I live by, if I can share both of them. So the first one is by Leela Watson's, and I use it in most of my talks with people. Who's an Australian Indigenous activist, and she says, "If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." And I think for like right now, that's such an important message, particularly for groups being actively marginalized in parts of the world where we never thought that would happen.
Hmm.
Even more so now, I'm saying. And I think the second one, which I think is also equally as important, is one by someone who I think is quite fun social commentator, Fan Lebowitz. He says, "Think before you speak and read before you think." And I think there's a lot of people in the world that might benefit from some critical reflection. The saying I would put in the bin is when people say life is unfair. That's
Okay.
the thing I'd put in the bin because it doesn't have to be.
No.
It doesn't have to be unfair just because someone said so. I've heard that on various occasions throughout my career. But that's one I would put in the bin.
Straight in the bin.
Yeah.
What's been the best adventure of your life so far?
Geographically, my trip to the States was probably the most fun. I got into such mischief when I was out there and got into some good trouble, which was great. Um, but I think I guess like a more kind of personal adventure for me has really been recently kind of being with my husband and getting married and being able to celebrate that love in an institution that historically wasn't forgiving for people like us. So that has been a really exciting adventure with him and the family as well. So yeah, so I think that's something where I've learned a lot about myself, and I've actually really kind of come in to my own skin. I feel more confident as well, going through that.
What three words would you use to describe you and your origin story?
I was trying to think about this question as if it was on a movie poster and what would be like the three the three captions. It was really difficult.
Love the thinking.
so one of the things I did neglect to mention when I was younger is I loved the Transformers. I kind of have this vision of a Transformers poster. So one of the words is definitely transformative because I'm absolutely obsessed with Transformers. To my embarrassment, I still have my Transformers DVDs, and I don't even have a DVD player. I just have the DVDs because I just love them. So transformative is absolutely essential word for me. Um, despite my lived experiences, being queer, young, into multiple different cultures, not feeling displaced, I still hold on to the joyfulness. So joyful is the other word of my origin story. Irrespective of my experiences, my family brought joy and love to everything, even if it didn't feel like it all the time, but it was there. And that's really important. Um, and the last one is disruptive. It's it's important. And I mean disruptive in the most positive, constructive, most powerful way possible. Because disruptive is often seen as a negative thing, but it isn't. It's actually a really good thing. And I want to encourage more people to feel that they can do that.
Get disruptive, people.
Yep.
Let's fast forward a little bit.
Yeah.
What exciting things do you have coming up?
Oh, so I'm working on my next book with an amazing group of authors, which will be a similar vein to the previous edited collection, but it'll be titled Intersectionality in Higher Education: An Action Guide for Change. So we're hard working at the moment to get that underway. Really kind of working on creating and cultivating more platforms so that people can speak, be heard, be empowered. My main thing this year is to create more community and more collective responsibility for advancing this equalities work more broadly. And I've got influence to be able to make that happen. So I'm really trying to wield that to bring people together. I just don't think we can continue to work in separation of one another. So I'm really trying to get the community together to make things happen. So lots more of events, lots more kind of initiatives, work, and lots of advisory work in different ways, influencing all parts of the system as much as I can. So yeah,
Oh, I love that. Collaboration and co-production.
yeah,
It's so
absolutely,
important.
yeah.
What brings you joy?
Oh, good question. That's hard. That's a hard question. What brings me joy is, I think in this work you can forget that there is joy to be celebrated. Actually, one of the things that does bring me joy is being able to celebrate people and movements before they even happen and as they happen. I have to say, like being part of, I think one of the things I said that in this conversation is I get to hang out with some of the coolest people that inspire me, and that in itself really brings me joy because we're all supporting each other to do something greater than ourselves. And I think that's really cool. I think that's really awesome. I just love that. I also love being able to kind of put on events where people can come to my institution or to different spaces and places and be themselves and have a good time and not feel like they're bound by their oppression in those particular spaces, even for that moment, and celebrate that. We had a conference last year. We called it a conference, but didn't make it a conference at all. We had musicians, we had an artist present. We made it super creative and super. We kind of tipped the idea of a conference on its head and just made it something much more celebratory. One of our keynote speakers was singing at one point. It was just this really joyful celebration of expertise and excellence in the room. And if I can create more of those moments and bring more of that joy in and actively seek it out, that's what I'm really trying to do. But I think that there's lots of different types of joy, but being around people is one of the big things for sure.
I love that. Oh, that conference sounds amazing. More of that, please. Do you have any practical takeaways for anyone wanting to carve out a career in inclusion?
Yeah, it's quite tricky because it's still kind of an emerging profession in some
Mm.
ways
And shifting as well
and
all the
shifting. Yeah,
time.
absolutely. I would say if you're looking to kind of get into equality, diversity, and inclusion work in a professional capacity as a career in some ways, start speaking and reaching out to people that are already doing it. Join any events or free events where people are speaking about equality and inclusion work more broadly. Invest in a multidisciplinary set of skills. When you're doing equality and inclusion work, you need to be the policymaker, the communicator, you need to be the the diplomat, you need to be the project manager, you need to be an events person, you need to do a lot of different things. So be prepared to just throw yourself into lots of different spaces and places. And don't assume that equality and inclusion is just an HR role. It goes much more beyond that. If you want to really achieve impact, always broaden the frame with it. And there's no one route into it. But there are some initiatives, there are some places and short courses online where you can kind of get a taste for it, I think. So do explore those initiatives and activities out there as well.
Thank you. Solid advice there. I mean, I found myself in it through an events route kind of thing, 20
Yeah,
years in the
yeah,
events
yeah.
industry, and that's how I've wound up in it.
Yeah,
Um,
and for me academically, it
yeah,
was yeah, through academia. But yeah,
yeah, that's it. I think it's going beyond just that initial HR perspective where it started.
yeah,
And again, it's learning that it needs to be built into every part of an organization as well.
definitely.
Yeah. My final question for you is this: do you have any words of encouragement or wisdom for anyone out there to help them get to wherever they're going?
Words of wisdom. Oh, I wonder what I would have told myself before embarking on this career. I think one of the core things that comes to mind is invest in your support system, whether that's your family or community or friends. Invest in your community because work careers might go wrong, and they might be really difficult and they might change. But your community and your people ideally don't. They stick with you. They're your support system. That's something I think is so important, particularly if you're looking at this work in social justice. The number of conversations I've had with my family, even as a result of talking about some of the things that I'm doing, has really deepened our relationship, and they support me in a way that I wouldn't have expected them to if I hadn't opened up to them. And that has helped give me fuel to keep doing what I'm doing. The other part, I think, really is we have to be able to speak truth to power. We have to try and make sure that we feel bold and brave and courageous in everything we do, because that's really, really, really important. We, I, we have to find spaces and create spaces where we can do that as well. Because I think if we're not questioning things, if we're not asking those challenging questions, or adding our curiosity to things, we're not changing systems, we're not making things more adaptable to the year, the decade we're working in as well. So I think that kind of bold and bravery, if you're coming into a workforce with that, don't lose it just because of the system. Keep it alive for as long as possible. And it's so important to be able to feel you can say what you is on your mind, because we spend far too much of our life working. So we have to try and get something from it, some solace in some ways. So yeah.
Aaron, thank you so much for being such a wonderful guest on Pause and Rewind. It's been great chatting to you. I've loved learning more about you, and I hope to see you in person soon.
Thanks so much, Neil. It's been such a pleasure being in conversation with you today. So yeah.
Love it. Can't wait to get it out there. See you soon.
See ya.
Thank you so much again, Aaron, for being such a great guest on Pause and Rewind. Hearing about your story, about sitting across two very different cultures and feeling that sense of displacement and belonging at the same time, two things can be true at once. And our lives, our lived experience, our past can be quite complicated and they really inform who we are. And when you think about, Aaron growing up as the quiet one in the family and finding his voice later, and going on to surprise his family and those around him, from being someone that nobody really thought he would achieve very much to those 3 degrees, an honorary doctorate, a book, and just the profile and reputation he has and the credibility he has for what he does. That massive educational journey, dips and highs and lows in his career, and flexing around what he originally started doing from kind of marketing through to counseling and finding his feet in research, and but his his PhD and coming across intersectionality, and how that really led to him understanding, reflecting on, and channeling his lived experience to show up as the Dr. Aaron Verna that we know now. I loved hearing him reflect on that beautiful ceremony for his honorary doctorate at the University of Dundee, and just how absolutely so well deserved that is. Um, Disruption, positive disruption. We all need to be disruptive, particularly with what we're seeing in society right now. Nothing's going to change unless we learn to channel our disruptive, positive, and constructive disruption. And I feel that Aaron has really done that. And you know, the three words he uses to describe his story, his origin story: transformative, joyful, and disruptive, and the love that he has for his career, for what he does, for working with awesome people. And again, so resonates with me. Working in DEI and particularly in the inclusion space, you do get to work with so many incredible people. And Aaron is one of them. I'm so grateful for his time and his support and championing me. He really does. Um, Thank you, Aaron. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. As always, please do like, share, comment. Please do comment on Spotify. I'd love to get some comments coming up on my episodes. But thank you so much. Please stay tuned for more amazing guests on Pause and Rewind. Cheers.